everyone. Welcome this afternoon to this presentation of Mastery in Mathematics. We have so much to share with you, and you all have asked us so many terrific questions. We want to get started right away, but by way of introduction, my name is Gretchen Rowe. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator here at Demme, Placement Specialist here for the last 8 years. And I'm the homeschooling mom of 6. 5 of them are now college graduates, and the youngest is a junior in high school. And it's been a joyful journey. Today, I am joined by 3 colleagues, Lisa Chimento, Sandra Rush, and Michael Sass. And I will begin with asking Lisa to introduce herself, and then we'll go to Michael. And then by then, Sandra's camera should be on, and we'll ask Sandra to introduce herself as well. So Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Chimento. I am a customer success consultant here at Demme Learning. I have been with the company full-time for 5 years. Before then, I worked at homeschool conventions. I have 4 children that I homeschooled for 25 years. They are all grown and flown right now. And it's been a pleasure to work here. I have wonderful teammates and colleagues at the company, and it is really a joy to speak to all of you.
Michael?
Yes, thank you. My name is Michael Sass. I've worked alongside homeschoolers for the past 19 years now. I've been with Demme Learning for the past 8. I am a placement specialist alongside with Lisa Chimento and our colleague Sue Wachter. And we just enjoy being able to put a plan together for your students and be able to get to know you and your dreams and your goals for your kids. And so we're excited to be here today to discuss Mastery.
I'm Sandra Rush, and I have been with Demme Learning Math UC for 30 years. And I love being with the company. I am a customer service rep. So if you call in on the phone or chat, you might get me on there, and I would love to serve you. Thank you.
Let's get started. I want to begin. We have so many things that we have talked about, but Lisa, I would really like for you to, actually, I'm going to start with Sandra. And Sandra, if you would be kind enough to talk with us a little bit about the best practice for a parent to get the most out of a Math UC experience.
Well, the best way is to first read your instruction manual for the introduction that's there, and watch the introduction that's on your video when you're getting started. And then week by week, you want to start on Monday by reading your teacher's manual ahead of time so you know what's coming, what the concept's going to be for the week. Then you're going to watch your video with your student. Then you and the student are going to sit and have the student work the first practice page in your workbook. They have 3 practice pages for the week, and then they have 3 systematic review pages, an application enrichment page, and a test at the end of the week. So then, depending on how you want to do it, if you want to do it in a 5-day school week, you do a practice page, a systematic page, systematic review page Tuesday and Wednesday. Systematic review page if you need it on Thursday, along with the application enrichment. And then you and the student work through the test on Friday. The teach back method is what we want. When we say a student has mastered concepts, if they can teach it back to someone else. So have them teach you through the steps of the problems on those pages, not using the manipulatives unless it specifically says to build something. If they have problems they miss, you might want to go back and do a little bit more review before you move on to the next week's lesson. Thanks, Gretchen.
So that's the way to get the best out of the program, but then we have many more things that we wanted to share with you all today. Lisa, can you talk about parents sometimes confuse fact mastery with concept mastery? And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what we discussed last week in preparation for that.
Yes, absolutely. You know, in both the alpha level and the gamma level of Math UC, we're dealing with 2 different issues. We're talking about understanding of concepts and memorization of facts. And so you need to be cognizant of both. The workbook pages are very, very helpful as you're working towards mastery. However, you need to be careful not to rely on workbook answers to tell you whether or not your students have memorized their facts, because if they're working alone, then you're not able to view how they're getting their answers. They might be counting on their fingers or counting in their head or tapping their finger on the table. Or for multiplication facts, if they are skip counting, that's still counting. It's not fact mastery. So what you'll need to do, apart from the workbook pages, is make sure that you are asking them face to face, the facts as you cover them, and take a look and see how they're doing. Are they looking up in the air and sort of counting up in their heads? Are their fingers wiggling down by their side? You want to make sure you're letting them know, listen, if you need to count, just let me know and we'll work on this some more. The build, write, say method is tremendously effective for fact mastery. So please put it into place, not just the build, but the build, write, and say. And Steve Demme does demonstrate this in the video lessons. So be sure and take a look at that. And then once they show you that they can recall the facts quickly, then you're going to want to be reviewing those facts often for long-term retention. And just a quick note here, a lot of people ask this question, does it have to be within 3 seconds? That 3-second guideline is just what I just said. It's a general guideline. Some children have a slower processing speed. They might take more than 3 seconds for the information to get into their brain and back out their mouth again, but it doesn't mean they're counting. The thing to be watching for is whether or not they're counting for their facts or using some other strategy apart from automatic recall.
Michael, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what we discussed as the desire from a parent's perspective not to have to back up, and why pausing and making sure that those facts are committed to memory is so very important in this process.
Absolutely. And I think I'm guilty of this as well as anybody. I want to keep my student on track. I don't want them to be perceived as being behind the other students that are maybe at the equal level of them. I want them to know, I want to know as a homeschool parent that I'm doing as well as they are. And a lot of times, as Gretchen will speak on this maybe later, is about, we sometimes just see the highlight reels of other parents, and we don't get to see some of the struggles that they have. What we've seen so many times in a lot of my conversations, if a parent, especially of 10, 12 years of age, says my student's struggling with math, almost guarantee that they don't have their facts memorized. We start to see that later on catch up with them, that they're starting to struggle, because if I have to look down and do my counting and look back, there's so many opportunities to make a mistake. I can get lost, I can forget steps, I can overcount or undercount. All of those things can occur, and my brain's just working overtime. So the best thing to do is, if they do not have their facts memorized, to just take that pause, take those moments, take those few months and help solidify those, because it's only going to help them grow and get stronger in math down the road. Because so many families have to go backwards and work on those facts to solidify them so that their student can move on and have success.
So one of the things that we often hear from parents, particularly when they have children who have been diagnosed with dyslexia, is that their dyslexic students just simply can't memorize the facts. One of the blessings of a Math U See experience is you're working with more than one sense. And Michael often talks about, maybe you're not going to get to 100% fact mastery, but he talks about even moving the ball 5% makes a tremendous amount of difference. Michael, could you bring that up?
Absolutely. I have a student that has ADHD and ODD and really has struggled with his academics. And I know if I can help him move the needle just a little bit, how much that's going to help him long term. And so, yes, just taking the time, even if the opportunity to memorize 100% isn't there, getting them from 25% to maybe 50%, that's a big win. I always caution parents to not settle, but to always continue to make that part of your week. A lot of times we hear families call us back and say they forgot all the facts that they've memorized. That's a very common concern. And it's a lot of times it's not that they forgot, it's just that they haven't been reviewing. And so making that a part of your week where you're continually to help those grow stronger, and maybe you can sneak that as you're continuing to review, some more may get memorized along the way that you weren't planning on or didn't stop to work on, but they just started to get stronger with those and started to commit those to memory. So even if you think they're memorized, take 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be during your school day. It can be when you're in the car. It can be while you're going for a walk, while you're doing a chore together, whatever it is. Taking just 10 minutes to find time to review those facts and help solidify those a little bit more. It goes a long way.
So Lisa, now I'm not talking about fact mastery. Now I'm going to talk about concept mastery. Can you model for our parents what a parent should be looking for in that teach back element?
Yeah, and this piggybacks on what Sandra said earlier about the teach back and how important it is. So as they're going through the different concepts, every step is a challenge to them until they understand it. So don't expect perfection right away. Don't expect them to be able to teach it back immediately. They might not be able to. But as you work through the sample problems with Steve Demme on the video lesson, or you work, as Sandra said, in some of the first workbook pages together, the ability to verbalize what the student is doing is huge, and you might need to model it for them. So you might want to do a couple of problems yourself and show them, this is what we're going to be going for. This is our goal. And then you can work a problem and verbalize the steps as you go. If it calls for using the blocks for those problems, use the blocks. Make sure that you're doing the build, write, say, and then be able to write out the problem as well. As you get up into beta and beyond, the problems are all going to be a little bit multi-step, and they'll become more and more multi-step as they go. Make sure that you are showing all your work and verbalizing each step as you go so that the student will know what to expect. And then once they catch on to that, it might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but eventually it will just become a part of what they do. And that's a tremendous skill, way outside of math, to be able to verbalize. But it lets you know that they've understood it, and now you know whether or not they're ready to progress to the next lesson. But it also does something really important for them. It deeper integrates that material into their own brain. It imprints it for them to be able to do that, and that's huge.
I'm trying not to have you guys listen to my clackety-clack keyboard as I'm answering questions here as we go along. And I want to make sure that parents know that this resource exists for them. This must be a well-kept secret of ours. We have something called a support center, and you can find the answer to a whole bunch of questions in that support center. Everything that's contained in there has been written by these fine staff members and many more of us who want to see that you have the success in your homeschool journey that is necessary for you to feel like you've hit a home run. All of that content that is in there is available to you at any time, but I also want you to know that we as a staff are all available to you as well. So if you find yourself struggling with the same thing more than once, you can pick up the phone and call. You might talk to Sandra, you might talk to Michael or Lisa. It depends on who's available that day. I think there's close to a dozen of us who answer the phone and offer support. So we want you to know that regardless where you are in the journey or what you're experiencing, you don't need to be frustrated. You need to find solutions, and we want to be part of that solution process for you. I would like to turn my attention in the next 5 minutes to the questions we've been asked, because we've been asked some really terrific ones. But before I do that, I asked Sandra to do something really important. And I wanted her, and she was like, oh, Gretchen, yeah, but I know she's so good at this. I watched her do this at a conference a couple of weeks ago. So I want her to talk about skip counting and multiplication, and how that skip counting is the entree to multiplication. It's not the end game. And she's going to offer a little visual for you as well. Sandra?
Do you think I need to share my screen or just pick it up and
I
show
think
it
you
here?
can do, if you can just pick it up maybe, or
Okay.
if you can, whatever you're most comfortable with. I will apologize to you all in advance. We just are getting a rocking thunderstorm. So that's the other reason I'm muting my mic. Nobody here needs to hear the thunder rolling in the background.
Okay. Well, as Gretchen mentioned, skip counting is what we generally think of in trying to memorize facts, but there really doesn't memorize facts. It's just a bridge between addition and subtraction to multiplication. In math, everything hinges on what you've learned before, but it's also pointing you to higher math. So what skip counting is pointing you to is to the next step, which is multiplication. But I want to show you here how we can go from counting to exponents in a couple of minutes. So I have 3 rows of 3 here. So we could go 1, 2, 3, counting up to 9, but that's slow, right? We could also go, okay, Gretchen, why don't you say the third one? And I'm going to point to the first 2. So 1, 2,
3,
4, 5,
6,
7, 8.
9.
Okay, now I'm going to point to mine, but I'm not going to say them, but Gretchen is going to say hers.
3, 6, 9.
Okay, so 3, 6, 9 is faster than counting, but we can get faster. So how many do we have going across?
3,
That would be 3. How many do we have going up?
3.
So that's 3 rows of 3, or 3 times 3, which is the same as 9. So that is faster. So 3 times, times 3 is 9. But
Move that
now,
over just a little bit, Sandra, so we can see that. Perfect.
okay, so we said it was 3 over, 3 up. What shape does it form?
A
A
rectangle.
square.
A square.
So it's 3 this way, 3 this way, 3 2 ways, or 3 squared. So I took you from counting to exponents in that 2 minutes. Now, the inverse of multiplication is division. So if I turn this over this way, we now have the division symbol. So we have 9 inside, and let's say we wanted to count 3 out of 9. How many 3s can we count out of 9? Would be 3. So that's how you go from multiplication to division.
Now you guys see why I wanted her to do that. Isn't it awesome? I think that that is often as parents, we, particularly if we are involved in co-op experiences, we think, you know, that being able to go 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, that's really awesome. But if you have to do that every time, just like Michael said, you're still counting. And we want it to be as easy as possible for a student to get to the end game. Often we counsel with parents who get about to what would be a 5th grade school experience. In the math UC world, it would be long division or epsilon. And parents say, I don't know, we were doing so great. Everything was just awesome. And then math hit the skids and we're having a challenge. Why are we having that challenge? That's because now we're asking your student to think about a process, not just a computation. And if your student hasn't had the balance between being able to explain the process that they're studying and being able to compute it, you're going to see that scale tip one way or the other, and you're going to find it to be difficult for your student to remain engaged. So we want that scale to be balanced, and that comes through the build, write, say that Lisa has explained, through the rehearsal that Michael has explained, and then through the thorough understanding that Sandra has explained. Michael, I want to visit one more thing that you said last week, and that is, as parents, we're really impatient. And so what should be, in order to not be impatient in filling these gaps, I want you to talk about what happens when you fill one gap. What are the dominoes that fall behind it? So
Sure, absolutely. This is very common too for parents, and I understand it. When we have to go back and work on something that we've already done, we want to hurry through that thing so we can get back to where we left off, right? And so it's very common. I think learning our math facts is probably the most boring thing I can think of in math, because it's just repetition over and over and over again. And we don't want to see our kids getting bored or getting frustrated or getting sick of doing something. We want to be that parent that's able to just move them seamlessly through the curriculum. And a lot of times it doesn't work that way. I know I spent 1.5 years working with my oldest to memorize his facts. It took time. I don't think he was quite ready for that stage yet when we started it. And it did cause some frustration. So we took a little bit of a break and we came back to it a little bit later. But he has it memorized now, and it took some time. But I think what we need to do is recognize the importance of this stage. I've seen so many kids, once they got them memorized, things just slowed down for them and made sense because they weren't thinking as hard. A lot of times I hear families tell me, I don't know, my kids, they're just lazy. They just can't get in. A lot of times it's not laziness, it's our brains just are working overtime and it's looking like laziness. And so what typically will happen, I've seen this so many times, is once we get that first gap filled where we're working on our math facts, other gaps naturally fill in. And so our goal is not to put you into a box and say, well, we did this, now we have to go over here. Our goal is to take a look at what we've accomplished and then take a look at that next stage. And if we did great with the next stage, we're going to skip it because sometimes gaps do that. They change, they go away completely. And the other thing that we do is we have a lot of different free resources for you to help you, or ways to customize the curriculum that can be a little bit cheaper and meet the needs of your student. And so a lot of times it's not that we have to start over and work our way all the way back up. It's we're just filling in a few gaps that may take from anywhere from 3 months to a year to complete, depending on where they are, to get them back up to where they left off. And so that's kind of the role that Lisa, myself, and Sue Wachter have as well, to help find that plan and work together with you at home to make sure that it's meeting your students' needs. So
I think it's also important to recognize that you're never too old to revisit this process. We have all been very delighted in the last week to share a story and a journey with a pair of women who are adults, in their 60s and their 90s. And I don't want to share the whole story because we're going to get the opportunity to share a video with you all in the coming months about these ladies' journey together. But let's just say that being a lifelong learner is an amazing experience. And watching a 65-year-old capture math for the first time in her life has been a joyful experience for us all here. So we want to make sure that you understand that the math ship never sails without you being able to catch it. And if you feel like there's frustration there, sometimes it's an analysis of where did the frustration begin? Because often where you're frustrated isn't what started the aggravation. And so we have adept tools to help you quantify that. And I think that makes a great deal of sense. Ariel has asked a great question. She says, my family is new to math, you see. My 8-year-old has successfully completed a second grade curriculum, which covered multi-digit addition and subtraction. That being said, I've noticed he has not completely mastered addition subtraction, so I've purchased the AIM program. After AIM, should I go back to beta or to gamma? And you know what? That's a great question. And I thank you for asking it, because the simple answer is we're not going to know until you finish AIM. But once you finish it, we'll have diagnostics for you that will tell you clearly if he's ready to step into gamma, if we need to step into gamma with a little bit of support for some beta processes, or if he's just really nailed beta and he's ready to go. And that's one of the beauties of using these interventions. Individualized mastery, you can see it behind me and you can see it behind Lisa. One of the things that you need to know is if you're struggling with multiplication, AIM for multiplication is a very powerful tool, but AIM for addition and subtraction is its prerequisite. So you need to make sure that one is not without the other. Lisa, I wonder if you would give our parents the analogy of the 75% foundation.
Yeah, I thought I was so brilliant when I talked about this, and then I found out that Sal Khan had actually done a video saying just about the same thing, but it helped me. It confirmed that I was on the right track. You know, math for me is very much like constructing a building. There is a natural sequence to math that doesn't exist for most other topics. You can teach history out of chronological order and English concepts and so forth, but with math, there is an inherent sequence built into it. So we try to follow that sequence here at Math UC. And so for those foundational concepts, if they are not solid, it's like pouring 75% of the foundation of your house and then saying, okay, let's start building on top of it. The more weight you add to that structure that has an insufficient and unstable foundation, the better chance that that thing's going to collapse or cave in, or, like the Tower of Pisa, start tipping over. It's important then to find out, okay, where are there gaps? Where is the lack of stability in that foundation? Because math topics are weighty. And if you keep adding higher and higher level concepts, it causes stress to that student who doesn't have the sufficient foundation. So you want to make sure that you identify where gaps might be. They might not be where you think they are. And then work on filling in those gaps. And very often when you do, you find out that it just sort of takes care of a bunch of other things that were problematic earlier, simply because you've shored up the foundation and now more things make sense to them. So do contact us. Like, for instance, students coming off of either of the AIM programs, go to the placement tool or contact a placement specialist, and we can help you determine where is that student conceptually.
I think one of the things that is important to recognize is that as your student ages, mastery explanation will look different for you. And if they learn at a young age how to explain, they might not be able to use the vocabulary of explanation that you would use as an adult. But if they have the manipulatives available to them, these manipulatives allow us to build and bridge a language gap that may provide them what they may be lacking in vocabulary. They can use the manipulatives to explain. Here's what's important, and many of you have asked this question. I'm looking at all the registration questions over here on my other monitor. Many of you said, well, what does it look like for an older student to portray mastery? And here's where I think it's really valuable to lay that 100% foundation. You may have a student who comes and explains something to you that you don't understand. So you may gain a greater understanding in their explanation. Maybe in the process of explaining, they work it out for themselves. They didn't really even need you. I am experiencing this on the reg with my son, who's taking pre-calculus honors this year. And frankly, I would hope never to ever have to scare pre-calculus, but because I'm just not a math person. But he'll often come to me and say, I need to talk this problem through with you. And in that process of talking through, he finds his mistake and he goes, oh, I understand. I have done nothing except been a sounding board for him. So what we're talking about is teaching your child to explain as best they can their understanding, because that flows into many of your other academic experiences as well. Sandra, I wonder if you could help answer this question. It came up a couple of different times about expectations for an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, as far as two things. First of all, time in. How much time should a parent expect a student to be able to work with materials, but then time out, as far as what should the parents' expectations be as far as that explanation of mastery? And when should that occur?
Well, like I mentioned, reading your teacher's manual so you're prepared, and then you and the student watch the video, then have the student do the A practice page on Monday. And in that practice page, you can start that process of having them explain, because what you're wanting to see on that practice page is, did they understand what Mr. Demme taught on the video? Can they teach it back to you? And you may, as Gretchen mentioned, you may have to both talk it through there a little bit on that first day, but that gives them that experience to start with. And so that day is going to take you about 5 to 7 minutes on the video at those ages. And then however long it takes you to work through that work page. So somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes on that day. And then, as mentioned, if you want to get it done in a 5-day school week, depending on how many worksheets you feel they need to show you that mastery, then you're going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes maybe, but you don't necessarily have to be there when they're working through the worksheets, but you do want to look at it that day instead of leaving it to the end of the week. So it may take you about 5 minutes just to kind of look through the worksheets when they're done that day. But you do want to make sure that as often as you can get them to do so, to use your manipulatives, because that's your building part. That's what's building those mental pictures for them and is going to give them the greater understanding. And then on Friday, as mentioned, going back to you being there when they're working through the problems on their test. If they're stumbling or struggling, talk about it. Then you can see, do we need to do some review or have we mastered? So that day is probably going to take you somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes as well.
Michael, Lisa, do you have anything to add?
One of the things that I don't want to forget to mention is the time that you spend with a student. I think this is really key, and we try to bring it up often when we have these roundtable discussions. A general guideline, rule of thumb, is to add 3 minutes to your student's age, and that's about the amount of peak performance and attention time that you'll have from them for new material. So if something is difficult and you've spent 15 or 20 minutes at it and it's really not getting through yet, put the thing away. Give that student a chance to rest at night, let their brain do some sorting out and organizing of that information, and come back at it tomorrow with fresh eyes and a fresh attitude, and give it another try and see if some things don't click a little bit better. To try to push through and spend half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, you've gone way beyond that student's ability to comprehend and retain what you've taught. And so you're sort of undoing the good work you want to do. And many parents call us and say, well, he understood it yesterday and today it's like he never saw it before. Well, you may have gone too long and his brain just wasn't able to take it in and retain it. So keep those sessions short. For long-term retention and better understanding, short sessions, more consistently, more sittings is more effective.
Well, that repetition is building mental neurons, and it may not come out right then. If you think about it, if you've been somewhere and you ran into an acquaintance, you know their name, but you can't think of it. And so you carry on this great conversation. Oh, it's great to see you. And you walk away going, what was her name? And then 2 or 3 days later, you're washing dishes and all of a sudden it pops into your head. So your brain is always processing in the background. And so the more you repeat it, but also staying in that time frame, the better the retention is going to be.
I'll say one thing. When you get started, if you're new to math, take some time before even jumping in to familiarize your kids with the blocks. Whatever time it takes for them to get to know what number and what color go together. I did this with both of my boys. It took about anywhere from 3 to 5 days, and they came up with a nickname for each of the blocks. And you'll hear Steve Demme do this. He has the number 8 block. It looks like a Hershey bar. They're near Hershey, Pennsylvania, so it's the Chocolate. The number 8. And so for my family, when we're doing a addition problem, for instance, the 3 pink block is our 3 pink little pigs. We push that together to combine with the 4 yellow pineapple block to equal the 7 white vanilla ice cream block. So they're building it. They're able to see those blocks and hopefully visualize those blocks in their mind. They're writing the full fact down. I have a lot of families that say we use flashcards. I played piano for a long time, and when I did recitals, I could picture the notes in my head as I was playing on the paper. One of the problems with flashcards is there's no answer, so I get a blank space when I'm looking directly at the flashcard. So if they write the full fact down, they can see the answer, build that muscle memory of what it looks like, and then we're going to ask them to say it back. And that's important because when you have to say what you're doing, it forces you to pay attention and not just go through the motions. But it says if you can if you can say what you're doing, you remember 40% more than just simply looking at it. So we're building with the blocks to see what the numbers look like together. We are picturing that in our mind. We're doing the writing to build that muscle memory, and we're saying it back. We're doing those 3 things together. And so that's kind of how it kind of works as a whole. It's not just to do it, but the multisensory approach really helps kids learn those facts.
I think Michael's really right. And I always learn something from my colleagues. I didn't know, Michael, that you played the piano. So now I'm going to have to dig into that one a little bit later. Parents will often say things like this that I think is important. Janet had said that she said, Matthew C has saved me. Mr. Demme is the best. My high performance autistic nephew gets stuck when we work through it and he gets frustrated. I need help knowing how much he really has to cover If he doesn't get slopes, for example, on algebra, will the world end? And Lisa's one of our Algebra 1 support specialists, as is Sandra. We all know that the world's not going to end, but I'm going to ask Sandra to talk a little bit about goal setting. You know, what are you looking for when you have a child who reaches that level? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, at that level, you think that alpha, beta is where you're going to just, set the goals and that's the end all. That's not true. You're still building on those foundational concepts when you get to Algebra 1. And so it's still step by step. That's your goal. Do they understand the steps? Do they have the foundation built that they need? And even with Algebra 1 students, we have them going back to those addition and subtraction facts or those multiplication facts, because all of those levels through algebra and going on forward still depend on that foundation of those facts. And so that's the goal there, is have you built the foundation? And then once you've built the foundation, then it's still step by step. For Gretchen mentioned the slope intercept and the graphing, those are still foundational lessons. So Lisa and Sue Wachter, that's been mentioned, say lessons 5, 6, 7 prepare you to be able to understand those lessons. And so Sue taught me, you got to put part of that formula at the top of the page, and you use that formula over and over. So it's still that, build that repetition in. And Lisa can talk more to those particular lessons because I'm still working on them. So I'm a lifelong learner.
Yeah, we all are. I just want to say really quickly, it's possible that your students' goals may not be engineering or something that they would particularly need a slope intercept form for. However, there really is benefit in working through those exercises and to understanding, because it builds critical thinking skills and it builds evaluation skills. Things are going on in Algebra 1 that are valuable throughout their lives as adults in many different fields. So I think it's worthwhile, even if the goal isn't to go into higher math levels.
Lisa, I wonder if you could talk about when you provide support for families, particularly in upper level materials, what do you find consistently as far as where the struggle is? It's not in the lesson in front of you. So
yeah, a lot of times when we talk to students that are working in pre-algebra or Algebra 1 and they're struggling, almost 100% of the time, the culprit is fractions. And that's understandable, because fractions are where things really start getting abstract. We're working with numbers that are generally less than 1. So you can't see it the way you can see a block. So what we've done is we've taken the idea of a single unit block and we blow it up into a large flat square. And now we can build fractions with clear overlays that are divided into halves, thirds, fourths, and so on. Those are our fraction overlays that come with the epsilon level. And they are powerful tools. These are not baby toys. They're not, this is a powerful tool for deeper understanding, to be able to concretely and visually work with fractions so that you understand why, when you're multiplying two fractions, your answer is actually smaller than the two numbers you started with. It's very counterintuitive, but there's a reason why. There's a reason why you have to have common denominators when you add or subtract fractions. So the overlays really give students that help that they need for the deeper understanding. And when they understand well, Algebra 1, chances for success there go way up. That's number one. Number two, students in algebra, pre-algebra, they're young teens. They are in a rush and a hurry for life. And they are going to be somewhat surprised when they need to slow down. And that's just the bottom line. They've been sort of going on autopilot up until now. But now you've got these multi-step problems with a variety of different operations going on in the same problem. And they need to take their time. They need to think through before they dive in and start answering. and evaluate that thing. And one of the things that Gretchen mentioned earlier is really powerful here, and that is for a student to be able to talk through the process of solving those problems as they do it. That verbalization is so helpful. They often find their own mistakes. They hear themselves say it, and then they catch themselves. And I do this all the time when I'm working on the phone with them, and I just wait a minute, I'll hear them go through the process verbally because I can't see what they're doing. And I just wait. I hear them say something wrong. And then a moment later they go, oh, wait a minute. No, that's not right. And so they've caught it themselves. That's awesome. Mistakes are not a bad thing here. They're opportunities for deeper learning. So let those mistakes happen without all kinds of punishment going on. Don't worry about grading the workbook pages. Let them learn through those workbook pages. Encourage them to slow down, encourage them to seek their own errors and see if they can correct them themselves. All of that is so, so helpful for deeper understanding, for the development of evaluation and critical thinking skills.
Lisa, I wonder if before we leave this piece of the conversation, if you could talk about the 20%, the wrong 20%, and why that's the valuable thing. So we encounter parents will say, well, they got 80%, so we're going to move on. Let's talk about why that 20% has a value.
Yeah, be careful that you're not allowing the percentage correct on a test or whatever determine whether or not you move on. Because if there is a pattern to the errors they're making, then that's one of those foundational skills Sandra was just talking about that might need to be filled in, that might need some review or maybe even re-instruction if they just didn't really quite catch it the first time through, because that's going to show up, and that's a gap that's just going to get deeper and deeper as they try to progress without having filled it in. So you want to make sure that you don't just rely on a percentage correct, okay, that's enough and we'll go on. Take a look at those errors. Sometimes they're just little careless errors that maybe they were working too quickly. Maybe they got it right on their scrap paper, but they copied it wrong, in their workbook. But pay attention to what kinds of errors were made, and make sure that the student can go back in and find it. And here's another biggie that I find all the time. If your student's not showing their work, this will do it for them, because if they can't find their own error, then they're probably going to make it again. But if they've shown their work, they'll be able to go back to that problem, identify where the error happened, and correct it themselves. And that's huge, because then they probably will have a really deeper understanding of that issue and probably will not make that error again. And so those are the kinds of things we want to pull together. Slow down, show your work, verbalize as you go. Powerful trio there.
Well, and I want to say there. Sorry.
No,
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Sandra. Go ahead. I apologize.
That's why I said, I have a lot of parents who will call and say, I just want to purchase a student book. And I say, well, we don't normally break sets apart because we feel all parts are necessary. And so that test book is a necessary part of the success. We don't look at our tests for grades. We look at those tests. Did they understand the week's concept? And as Lisa said, it may show some errors previous to that. And she mentioned pre-algebra and algebra 1, go back to that foundation of epsilon. Well, I want to go back further, because remember when I showed you multiplication, and then we went to, I showed you the reverse, the inverse, which is division. So you've got multiplication, you've got division. Fractions are division problems. So you can see that fractions hinge all the way back to multiplication. When you get to pre-algebra and algebra 1, if they're struggling at fractions, you have to make sure, was it fractions that they were struggling with, or did it go back to multiplication? So that's why sequence is important. That's why Math UC builds sequentially. So each piece is important. Sorry, Michael.
No, you're okay. I just had a quick comment to make. I think we have a lot of families that come to us from a spiral-based learning and come to us being a mastery-based. And some of the biggest concerns that I get from parents is, I want them doing the same thing over and over and over again. Or do you do it based upon percentage, like Lisa was talking about, being 80% or higher? And you only have 30 lessons. My book has 160 lessons with 16 tests and all of this. And one of the things that I think most parents struggle with the transition is that we're not necessarily asking you to do 3 pages of practice. What we have found is that maybe 5 to 10 problems isn't enough for most students to truly understand it well enough to move on. We want the student to decide when they've had enough practice, not the curriculum. And so as a parent, our mindset has to change a little bit coming to Math UC, because it's not necessarily let the student do the lesson, and when they get to the test, we'll see if they're having any trouble. Not to say every parent's doing that, but that's a very easy thing to do. Once we get to Math UC, our role changes a little bit. After every time we do a practice page, I ask my kids if they're ready to teach it back to me. And if they are, they do great, they're done. If they aren't, my job is to see where the struggles are coming up and where maybe these steps that they're not quite getting, and helping them understand that a little bit better so they don't have to do a third page the next day. And so that is a little bit of a transition coming from maybe a spiral-based learning to more of a mastery-based. Our goal isn't to do a lot of work, our goal is to understand it. And once that understanding happens, we can move on. And one more point, I guess, is that this teach back can look differently for all of your kids. It can be, we recognize they all have different vocabularies, they have different learning styles, they may even have some mental concerns like my son has. I let my youngest dress up as a teacher and teach me how to do it. And he has a marker board. I sit down and he shows me how to do it. He likes to play pretend, so we do it as pretend. My oldest student, he is by the rules, man. You get out your Lego instruction book and you follow it to the T, and you do not make a mistake. And so he's one that will show me every single step. And I have to be careful with him because he's one that's a perfectionist, and he will burst into tears if he thinks he's not doing a good enough job. So we have different ways of handling both of those kids, but we as parents know when they have it down well enough, right? And we know when that time comes. And so you have the freedom to know they have it down well enough, let's move on. The only caution I have is sometimes good enough isn't good enough, and it will catch up with you. So recognize that as well. But hopefully that helps a little bit.
I think good enough is not always good enough is a really good observation. And that applies in a lot of things. And I think that one of the things that is really important, many of you have brought this up, so I want to revisit something that I have seen Steve do often at conferences. When you have a child and you're not sure if mastery is being achieved, and there are tears and there is frustration, this is the time for you to read that child better than anybody else. And so what you may need to do as a parent is to sit down and simply say, look, today I'm going to do your math for you. And you sit there and you model verbalizing, writing the problem down, talking your way through it. You would be amazed at the amount of pressure that removes from a student. Because what we don't realize in homeschooling experiences, our kids have an even greater desire to please us. Sometimes they'll hide what they don't know. Sometimes their frustration comes out in really weird ways, and we're like, what is happening here? And so it's up to us to model how we want them to respond. Toward that end, you may see yourself in me. I didn't like math. I was real verbal about my dislike of math. And it was hard when I stepped into Math UC to understand how to use these things effectively. As a parent, it's up to us to be able to model effectiveness. And here's one of the things that I think is really important. I know the vast majority of us in adulthood have said at some point in time, why do we need algebra? We didn't need algebra for anything. Why did they make me learn algebra in high school? The truth of the matter is, believe it or not, we have a blog that says 6 reasons why you learn algebra. And it is the most read, reviewed, and downloaded blog that Demme has ever published. And so if you see yourself either saying that in front of your kids or thinking that it's coming and this is how I feel about it, reading that blog would be a really good investment of your time. I've put it in the chat. It will be in the follow-up email. And you would be amazed at how Sandra said, and it's actually what Sandra said that made me think of this. You don't realize what you're doing today has implications for the math you're going to do 2 years from now. And so recognizing where that is, I think it's always important to keep those learning pathways as open as possible. And one of the things as parents that we need to do is we need to take the time to set aside our presuppositions about how these little things work and travel on a little bit of faith that these little things do work. And I respond to social media posts all the time, and I'll see parents will say, oh, I was just so frustrated. I just didn't bother to learn Steve's way. I taught my kids the way I learned. And then those same parents will come back to us a year later and say, the wheels blew off our wagon and we don't know why. You'd be as surprised at how much power there is in process. And so we want you all to be as effective as possible in the process. Janet has said something that is really important. She said, we had a lot of tears last night. And if that is what you have in your household, we're here as a solution for you. Our beloved colleague Sue says, if somebody's crying, it's time to pick up the phone and give us a call, because we don't want that to happen. And so we want to be able to help you unpack why that may be. And not every key fits every lock. Not every answer is the same for every student. So we want to be able to make sure that we answer those questions for you. With that regard, I think it's also important. I'm laughing because now I have a woodpecker who's knocking on the wall outside my window. You guys are getting all sorts of sounds that don't have anything to do with this webinar. I want to go back to talking about the difference between progress and perfection. And Lisa, you said, I asked you to speak about that 20%. And I want to make sure that we as parents are setting our kids up for success. I want them to understand that math is not perfection, it's a language. So can you revisit that just a little bit as far as the language of mathematics and being able, particularly for the perfectionistic child, we want to uncork that early on in the process. And Sandra,
Yeah.
I know you have some comments about this as well. So I'll ask you to add those comments after Lisa says what she's going to say.
Yeah, I think that as adults, this really is going to require that we do the reframing of this idea of mistakes. It's really easy to fall into a habit of pulling out the red pen and making marks on the paper and grading it, but that's not really going to help them as much. And sometimes it's not the parents, sometimes it's the student who's the perfectionist. I know I was, and mistakes are hard to deal with in that situation. But this is where you get a chance to reframe the idea of mistakes in math as an opportunity for deeper learning, deeper understanding. Mistakes are going to happen. Let's just all be prepared for it. And know that you're not going to get punished. This is not a bad thing. Let's go and find where the error occurred and see what we can do. What gold can we pull out of this situation? But that's going to have to be reframing from you, and it might need some modeling from you, moms and dads too, because when you make mistakes during the day on anything that you're doing, this is an opportunity for you to think about, how do I respond to my own errors in front of my kids? It might need some change. I know that I needed to on my own part. And so lifelong learning is for all of us, really, truly. And I'll let Sandra go on from there.
Well, one comment I want to make about algebra first, before I say anything else, is that, and now I lost it in listening to you. All right, I'll come back to that. Hopefully it'll come back to me. But I personally had high 90s on my math all the way through school. So obviously I could do it. However, when I saw Mr. Demme do the first presentation that I saw him do, I kept finding myself go, oh, that's why that works that way, especially with fractions and then pre-algebra and algebra 1. And so I realized that you can do things out of rote memorization and being a good student, but still not understand why it works. And that's where the seeing part, the manipulatives of math you see, come into play and give you that understanding. But the thing that I was wanting to say is that one statement helps with algebra 1, and that is, if you understand that you've been doing algebra all the way through the curriculum, that takes a lot of that pressure off. If you say 2 + 3 = what, algebra 1 is solving for an unknown. So yes, there's a lot more things like that are abstract, like graphing and that kind of thing, but it's solving for an unknown. And so when we show our frustration over, oh, I can't believe I did that, that's showing our students that's how they need to react. But if we said, oh, now I get it, but I had to make that mistake first before I got that understanding. So thank you.
We're coming up to the top of the hour, so we're ending our session shortly. And I wonder if, Michael, you would lead off just closing commentary for our families. And then
Yeah,
Sandra, I'll go to you, and Lisa, you can have the last word.
First of all, thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure to spend an hour with you. I just have a closing remark. Usually there are 3 reasons I see if Math-UC isn't working to what you're hoping. Usually there are 3 things that have occurred. One is that we're not using all the materials like Sandra brought up. We're not using the teacher's guide. We're not watching the videos. We're skipping the manipulatives, those type of things. Secondly, placement. Rarely is it that we get to algebra, like Lisa said, and found out algebra 1's the reason they're struggling. It's maybe fractions. Same thing with division. If we get to division, they're struggling with division. It's rarely division's problem. It's usually something that occurred before then. So we'd be happy to discuss placement and make sure that we're filling in the gaps, and only the gaps. We don't want them to work on things they understand, but only work with the things that they need a little bit more practice with. And then finally, the comment that I made recently is that you have it down good enough, because like I said, good enough catches up with you at some point. If we keep moving forward, those gaps will start to occur if we truly don't have a good understanding. So those are the 3 things I'm going to leave you with. We are excited to be able to pick up the phone and help in any way that we can. So please, we don't just say that, we mean it. Just call us, please, and we'll be happy to have a conversation and find out how we can work together to find a solution.
We're here for you. You get a live person. Most of the time, if it's really busy, you might get to taken over to voicemail, but that's extremely rare. We're here for you. We want to hear from you. We want to help you. If you're having struggles, or your student is and you're frustrated, we want to take the frustration out of your math. We want you to see that math is fun. Even for kids that seem to have math minds, as many of you mentioned, they still have their struggles. And one of their struggles might be, I don't think I need to do all these steps. I don't want to write down all these steps. I hope that you've taken away today, the steps are important. Being able to talk through the steps is important. Using each facet of the material is important. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you today. Thanks so much for attending.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Sandra. Math-UC gives students the opportunity to learn material through a variety of sensory input. And using multiple senses is the best way to learn, because no matter what your child's learning preference is, if they're only being delivered material through a single sense all the time, it limits their other senses. But if you're delivering material through multiple modalities, and they're seeing it, they're hearing it, they're building it, they're writing it, they're saying it, all of those different avenues of learning are developing and growing in them. So, you might have children that are reluctant to use the blocks. Maybe you say to them, listen, you need to use the blocks, but I'll let you do it for this many problems today. And if you'll do it for this many problems today, you're good to go. Maybe they're reluctant to verbalize, say to them, okay, we need to verbalize. I'm going to ask you to verbalize 2 problems today, and then I'll verbalize 2 to you. There are ways to work with this. But the more you do this, the more comfortable they will get with it, and the better they will get at it. So, and again, please do call us if you have questions. We're here to support you. That's what we love to do. And it has been a pleasure.